campaign. And one thing a friend said to me, interestingly, which is, okay, Charlie, we've pushed back against the media on COVID, on lockdowns, on Ukraine, on the border, on so like maybe we should also ask a question: is the media totally presenting the truth when it comes to Israel? Just a question, that maybe we shouldn't believe everything the media says, because I know I've been conditioned to ask a lot more critical questions over the last.
All right, folks, welcome to Nino's Corner. We just did an amazing podcast on ninoscorner.tv. I'm joined with Saganon once again, and we're going to be talking about the Charlie Kirk assassination. Saganon, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me back to FluffTube, Nino. Good to be here.
Kirk, I think right now more than ever, my audience needs to know that, folks, they're resorting to these fear-based tactics, these fear-based tactics, these trauma-based programming events because they're losing. And I really mean that. They have to resort to these tactics because they are losing. What we all witnessed yesterday was nothing less than horrific. But, folks, I think there's an important lesson here. And I don't know how you feel about this, SG, but, you can only go into a rabies-infected dog den so many times before you get bit. It's like every time I fought in a fight, the referee pulls you aside and says, hey, keep your hands high, protect yourself at all times. We need to expect this kind of retaliation and this backlash and expect to get bit if we're going into a den with rabies-infected dogs, trying to pet them and give them logic and reason. They say hell is a place absent of logic and reason. And it seems to me like these universities, these colleges are definitely a place of hell that are absent of logic and reason now. What's your thoughts, SG?
Well, it's very interesting that you should open the discussion with that, Nino, because I think it speaks to the broader issue here. And that's what a lot of commentators and, podcasts and news broadcasters and everyone out there on the information ecosystem today is really attempting to wrap their head around and crunch and understand, why did this happen? What were the causal factors? And how do we stop and arrest this trajectory of momentum here in the United States of America, right? We can remember a time when we were children that the world had its difficulties and there was tension between political, ideas and discussions. And the Thanksgiving dinner table was a little bit unpleasant sometimes when that conspiracy fringe family member was there, home for the holidays for their yearly appearance at the family dinner. But other than that, it didn't really go much further than that. You had the typical frictions that developed between growing adolescents of both genders. You had the typical frictions of certain communities and cultures here. Within the United States, we're a broad and diverse nation with those types of things. But over the last 15 to 20 years, something has clearly changed. And I would submit to folks out there that it began to change really in earnest post 9/11, 2001, which happens to be very interesting considering the day we're doing this broadcast. And it became an artificially engineered situation, a situation here domestically within the common culture, within the common understanding and the popular discourse about what are acceptable and unacceptable behaviors. And when we look at what's happening right now with the circus clowns that are far to the left of center and showcasing the entirety of their rectal areas with what's happening by their reactions online, I think what we have to stop and appreciate is that these are individuals, most of them, the vast majority of them, who are around the millennial or xennial age range and who have been subjected to military-grade psychological mind control of an intense and traumatizing fashion for at least the last 25 to 30 years. And so as we look at what Charlie Kirk was doing, Charlie Kirk was unraveling that dream spell. He was removing people from that transformation, and he was doing it in the most consequential demographic to any society anywhere, which is its youth. We talked a little bit on the other podcast about who gains from something like this. And, we can ask those questions as we go forward. And I think it's worth asking those questions. But long term, I think the overall gamesmanship is going to be had by any interest out there, either in the United States or around the world, that seeks to erode the popular discussion and minimize freedom of speech.
This is a spiritual war. A lot of people say at the surface level, this is a culture war, but it's a spiritual war at its core. At the surface level, it comes off as a culture war. At its core, it's spiritual. So what would evil do? Well, they would fill that vacuum with a conservative type of personality to lead the youth astray. And that's my point here. Who's going to come in and fill that vacuum and lead the youth astray? I believe there's many candidates for that. I'm not going to say who because it's too early in the game, but it sure seems to me like right now with this vacuum being open, they're going to fill it. Do you agree with me, SG?
Well, I think what you're going to see probably in response to this is a vacuum filling operation from all major political factions, right? And this may end up being something that melds itself into a broader public bridge between ideologies, which is what Mr. Kirk wanted to begin with. But I think the point that you're driving at is that the need for vigilance could not be higher. As we look at what's happening right now and the outfall of the fallout of any major national loss of any kind, you have opportunists that come into the mix. Sometimes they're just driven by greed and self-interest. You have ideologues that come into the mix, oftentimes from the opposing ideology, sometimes from your own ideology. You have individuals who have a interest and a malintent right from the core. Perhaps they're a captured operation by some sort of financial deal that they have in the background. Perhaps they're just zealotous in their own personal life and they want to do harm to the major movement itself. And so they will also seek to rise into the sphere and into the limelight. I think what we have to remember is something that Mr. Kirk talked about at all times, right? Being eternally vigilant about freedom itself, understanding that freedom is a matter of interpreting the world around us and then responding accordingly and being willing, to have the discussions about what we're seeing and interpreting and experiencing with one another. That was the core, really, of the message that he brought to many of these campuses that he took Turning Point and a number of other groups to, and accompanied a number of other groups to along in his journeys. And so looking at the vacuum that you described a moment ago as what has been created now as a result of all of this, I think that patriots need to keep in mind that responding in the fashion that the left would seek to ignite and that many of the clowns on that side of the aisle have responded in at this point, that only ensures that the vacuum is filled with something that is antithetical, that is opposite of what Mr. Kirk would have wanted. And so the best way to honor his memory, in my own personal opinion, is to take that vacuum and fill it with genuine, good-hearted American patriots who are now emboldened and not discouraged to speak the truth. As when we ask the question, who benefits from something like this? If no one in the U.S. political landscape, except maybe for 5 to 7% of the sycophantics on the very radical left, are going to benefit from something like this, then who benefits in a foreign capacity? And I think when we look around the world, and we're not going to get too deep into it on FluffTube, but when we look around the world, there are several different organizations and entities that would stand to gain from the removal of Mr. Kirk's voice to the broader worldwide Western world public discourse, right? You have globalist interests of many different flavors and having many different puppeteers and different levels of hierarchical structure that would benefit lock, stock, and barrel from the removal of someone like Charlie Kirk, not only from the political landscape down the road, which you referenced a moment ago, but also to destroy and remove his influence with the youth generation that becomes the next generation of leaders around the world. And so I think we have to appreciate and we have to examine that there is a possibility that a foreign actor, either paramilitary and rogue, or perhaps state actor or state-backed actors, that would benefit from something like this. And it seems very odd, the constellation of events that we saw in the immediate fallout of the assassination, that it was just a rogue individual job politically motivated by the radical left here in the United States.
And, the trauma-based programming that they've used is to paralyze a generation, keep them in fear from ever standing up, ever speaking out, ever getting on their soapbox. This now has paralyzed another generation, just like JFK, RFK, MLK, and so on and so forth. And folks, we talk about this. Gee, is there anything else you want to say?
I think the only thing I would close out with, especially for the audience that's going to receive the broadest view of this particular program and broadcast, is that this is the penultimate moment, if you will, the prime moment for pausing before we respond. We really do have to get a bit of a grip on our own emotions, on our own response mechanisms. It's normal to be upset. It's normal to be angry, confused, frustrated, all of those things, filled with righteous indignation. but we cannot respond effectively when we're in that place. And so that's why the good book talks about the peace that passes all understanding, because you don't really fully grasp it. You don't fully understand it until you find it. And typically you find it in the fallout of something that was very unpleasant, certainly of a traumatic style like what we've seen here. So I would admonish the audience to pray a bit and to center themselves before, making any particular moves. And let's honor Mr. Kirk's memory the way that he would have wanted us to do.
Agreed. SG, thank you so much for joining me. Folks, in Nino's Corner.tv, that's where it's at. All right, SG, thank you.
God bless all.